The doorbell rang, shaking the quiet morning air in the sleepy town of Brookridge Acres. It was still early, the sun just beginning to climb above the trees, casting a golden glow through the window. I was in the middle of my first cup of coffee, wearing my old flannel robe, when the ringing sounded again, more urgent this time. It was the kind of knock you hear in cop shows just before they break down the door. But this wasn't a TV drama. This was real life. I froze, staring at the door. The clock on the wall told me it was barely 7 a.m. "Who could this be?" I muttered, but deep down, I already knew something wasn't right. The pounding came again, louder this time, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My wife, Emily, had just walked into the room, tying her hair back in her usual no-nonsense way. She looked at me, raised an eyebrow, and then nodded toward the door. I set my mug down and moved toward the front door, my pulse quickening. Through the window, I saw two figures, their shapes darkened by the sunlight. I opened the door just enough to see their faces, but the moment I did, I regretted it. "Good morning, Mr. Parker," said a man I recognized. Ralph Turner, my neighbor from across the street. He was standing with 3 other men, all dressed in black uniforms. They looked like they were straight out of some low-budget cop movie, complete with fake badges that read HOA Inspector. I squinted at Ralph, trying to make sense of what was happening. His expression was smug, his sunglasses reflecting the early morning light. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice barely holding back the confusion and growing frustration. Ralph smirked, stepping forward. "We've had reports of a violation on your property," he said. "Step aside, Mr. Parker. Your wife needs to come with us for questioning." I blinked, trying to process what I had just heard. "Questioning? By the HOA?" I repeated, as if saying it aloud would make it sound less ridiculous. His smile widened, like he was enjoying the moment too much. "Yes, neighborhood safety is a priority here in Brookridge Acres. We need to investigate immediately." Behind him, the others shifted their weight, trying to look imposing. But it wasn't just their ridiculous outfits that made me uneasy. It was the fact that these men were standing on my doorstep, claiming authority without any legal right to do so. I glanced at Emily, who had stepped into the room behind me. She caught my eye and took a deep breath, clearly not as shocked as I was. "Ralph, do you have a warrant?" she asked, her tone calm but sharp as a blade. Ralph hesitated, his eyes flicking to the others. "We don't need a warrant for something like this," he said, his voice rising just a bit, but it didn't carry the weight he thought it did. "Just step aside." Emily didn't move. Instead, she met his gaze directly, unwavering. "You're standing on private property without permission, and I don't see any legal documentation that would allow you to make demands. You should leave now." The silence hung heavy between us. For a moment, Ralph seemed like he was going to escalate things, but then he glanced at the men behind him and I saw the shift in his posture. He wasn't expecting Emily to stand her ground. He wasn't expecting anyone to challenge him. "Daniel," Emily said, not looking away from Ralph, "call the sheriff's office. Tell them we've got 4 men here impersonating officers." Ralph's face turned crimson, his jaw tightening. "You're making a huge mistake," he sneered, but there was fear creeping into his voice now. "You're the one making a mistake, Ralph," Emily replied coolly, her eyes still locked on his. "And you're running out of time." The tension was palpable, and for a moment, I thought Ralph might make a move, but instead, he just took a step back. "This isn't over," he spat, "not by a long shot." And with that, the men turned and walked off the porch, their fake badges glinting in the morning light as they retreated. I watched them go, still in disbelief. Who did they think they were? Before we dive deeper, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, share this story with anyone who's dealt with an overreaching HOA, and leave us a comment telling us about your worst neighborhood experience. You won't want to miss what happens next. Trust me, the battle is just getting started. I stood there for a few moments, processing the strange turn of events, but Emily was already taking charge. She walked into the kitchen, grabbed her phone, and started typing quickly. "It's not over," she said quietly as she tapped the screen. "Not by a long shot." The next few days were filled with strange visits, and even stranger letters. The HOA wasn't backing down. Every day, more complaints arrived, some about the lawn not being perfectly manicured, others about the fact that we'd replaced the old rickety fence with a brand new one for privacy. A simple project, one that was well within our rights as homeowners, but the HOA was determined to make it an issue. I tried to brush it off, but something about the way they were pushing, it felt personal. And when Emily found a letter slipped under our front door one evening, her face went pale. It wasn't just a complaint this time, it was a lawsuit. They weren't just playing games anymore. The HOA was out for blood, and just like that, I realized this wasn't about a fence. It wasn't about some trivial dispute. This was about something much bigger, something more dangerous. What Emily uncovered next turned our quiet suburban life upside down and revealed that the HOA, led by Ralph Turner, was part of a far-reaching corruption scheme. And we had no idea how deep it went. As the threats escalated, we had no choice but to go on the offensive. But would we be able to outsmart them before everything we'd worked for was destroyed? The days after Ralph and his crew had left were tense. The HOA wasn't going to let this go. Every time I checked the mailbox, I found another letter, each one worse than the last. The first was a warning about our fence. The second was about our yard, claiming the lawn had unsightly patches. Soon there were complaints about the placement of our garden gnomes and the size of our porch light fixtures. It felt like the HOA was combing over every inch of our property, looking for any reason to harass us. But the worst was yet to come. Late one evening, just as I was about to sit down for dinner, the doorbell rang again. This time I wasn't surprised. Emily answered it, her face going pale when she saw who was standing there. It was Ralph, this time, with a lawyer in tow. The lawyer handed Emily a thick envelope with official-looking papers. "We've decided to take this to court," Ralph said with that same smug grin. "It seems you're just not understanding the importance of following community standards. We've got an official lawsuit filed against you for violations of HOA rules and regulations." Emily's hand clenched into a fist at her side, but her voice remained calm. "We've done everything by the book. The fence is legal, the permits are in order, and everything we've done here is within city guidelines. You can't force us to tear it down." Ralph's lawyer spoke up, his voice cold and detached. "It's not just about the fence anymore. It's about creating a harmonious environment for the community. The entire neighborhood's property values are at risk if we allow such violations." I could feel the frustration building up in my chest, but Emily was the one to speak. "We're not backing down," she said firmly. "We have every right to make changes to our property. If you want to fight, you got one." Ralph's lawyer smiled slightly, but it wasn't friendly. "We'll see how well that holds up in court." With that, he handed Emily the papers and turned to leave. As the days passed, the situation became more than just a legal battle. The neighborhood began to change, and it wasn't just the HOA turning up the heat. The people we'd once waved to casually on our walks now crossed the street when they saw us coming. The neighbors, who'd been friendly at first, started avoiding us, pretending not to see us when we passed by. Even the small community gatherings that used to be so easy became awkward. Emily could sense it too. She'd stop by the neighbors' houses to try and reason with them, but most of them had already been swayed by Ralph's version of the story. It seemed like everyone had already decided we were in the wrong. No one wanted to stick their necks out, and the more we tried to fight back, the more isolated we became. That's when things started to get personal. One afternoon I was at work when I received a call from Emily. Her voice was tight and she sounded scared. "Dan, something's not right." I found a note in our mailbox. It's not from the HOA, but it's definitely related. It says that if we don't comply, things could get ugly. I felt my blood run cold. The HOA had been relentless, but now there were threats? I couldn't let it go. That evening, we sat down together, reading over the note Emily had found. It was threatening, no doubt about it. It told us we had one more chance to comply or else. The last line read, "You won't be safe in Brookridge Acres if you keep defying us." Emily's usual calm demeanor was gone. She was angry now, something I hadn't seen in her before. "They've crossed a line, Dan. This isn't just about a fence anymore. This is about control." I couldn't agree more, but there was no clear path to follow. We'd tried going the legal route, but every step we took was met with a wall of red tape. The lawyer we'd hired seemed more interested in dragging things out than finding a solution. It felt like the system itself was stacked against us, and I began to realize that this wasn't just a local dispute anymore. We were dealing with something bigger, something deeply entrenched in the town's power structure. That night, Emily made a decision that would change everything. I'm not waiting for them to strike first. I'm going to find out who's behind this. I don't care if I have to go through every legal channel available. We'll uncover what's really going on, even if it means exposing every dark corner of Brookridge Acres. I could see the fire in her eyes. She wasn't going to stop, and neither was I. The next morning, Emily took her first step into uncovering the truth. What she found was more than we ever could have imagined. The HOA, led by Ralph, wasn't just targeting us. They were involved in something much darker. But what we didn't realize was how far the rabbit hole went, and how much danger we were really in. The days following our discovery of Ralph Turner's connection to a web of shady real estate deals felt like an emotional roller coaster. Emily and I were both determined to expose the truth, but the pressure was mounting on all sides. The threats from the HOA were no longer just about the fence. They were about power and manipulation. I could see the anger burning in Emily's eyes as she pieced together the evidence. Ralph wasn't just the HOA president. He was at the heart of a complex system designed to force homeowners out of their properties, buy them for pennies on the dollar, and flip them for huge profits. This wasn't a small-town dispute. It was a full-blown scam, and we were caught right in the middle. Emily's drive to expose Ralph and his cronies only grew stronger with each passing day. She reached out to a journalist who had investigated corruption in local communities before, and within hours the story was taking shape. We knew it was dangerous, but we had no choice but to move forward. Emily made contact with a few of the neighbors who had stood by us, asking them to show up at the upcoming HOA meeting. We were ready to confront Ralph head-on and put everything on the table. When the day of the meeting finally arrived, I could barely contain my nerves. The neighborhood park, where the meeting was to be held, was crowded with people. The HOA members, including Ralph, stood at the front, all wearing the same smug expressions that had infuriated me for weeks. It was clear that they thought they had this situation in the bag, but they had no idea what Emily had uncovered. Emily stood up, her voice steady and unwavering as she addressed the crowd. "I'm not just here to defend our fence. I'm here to defend the truth," she began, her words sharp, cutting through the tension in the air. "I've uncovered evidence that the HOA, led by Ralph Turner, has been involved in a scheme to manipulate property values, forcing homeowners to sell under duress and profiting from it. We have the documents to prove it." As she spoke, she pulled out the records she had gathered over the past week, the same documents she'd shown me. She passed them around, watching as the shocked expressions spread across the faces of the crowd. It was clear Ralph was starting to panic. His confident demeanor slipped, and his face turned pale as the weight of the accusations settled in. But just as I thought Emily had won the battle, Ralph stood up. His voice was no longer calm and controlled. It was laced with desperation. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he snapped, his fingers trembling as he pointed directly at Emily. "This isn't just about the fence or some property scam. You've made a big mistake, and now you'll regret it." The room fell silent, as everyone turned to look at him. Emily didn't flinch. She simply crossed her arms, her expression cold. But before she could respond, the door to the meeting room burst open and 3 men in dark suits stepped inside, their presence immediately commanding attention. Their sharp, businesslike demeanor cut through the tension in the room. I glanced at Emily, unsure of who these men were, but it was clear they weren't here for the neighborhood dispute. One of the men, tall with a stern expression, approached. "Ralph." "Ralph," he said, his voice low but firm, "we need to talk." Ralph's face drained of color as he met the man's gaze. The men in suits didn't introduce themselves. They didn't need to. Their authority was evident, and it was clear they were here to take control of the situation. As they exchanged a few words with Ralph, I could see the fear in his eyes, and my heart began to race. Who were these men, and what did they want? With Ralph? Had we just uncovered something even more dangerous than the scam we were already fighting? As the men spoke to Ralph in hushed tones, I turned to Emily, my pulse quickening. She seemed just as confused as I was, but there was a glimmer of recognition in her eyes. "We've just walked into something bigger than we thought," she whispered, her voice tinged with both fear and determination. The stakes had just been raised, and the game we were playing had shifted from local corruption to something much more dangerous. Ralph's empire wasn't just built on a few shady real estate deals. It was part of something much deeper, something we couldn't yet fully comprehend. The HOA was just the tip of the iceberg. We were no longer just fighting for our fence. We were fighting for our lives. The room felt like it was closing in on us as the 3 men in suits spoke quietly with Ralph. Every so often, one of them would glance at Emily and me, and I could feel the weight of their eyes on us. I could see Ralph's face shifting between disbelief and fear, his earlier bravado now completely gone. He was no longer the confident HOA president. Now he was just a man caught in something much bigger than himself. Emily stayed calm, but I could tell she was processing everything at lightning speed. She kept her gaze fixed on Ralph, her jaw clenched, but her mind was working, piecing together the pieces. There was no doubt in my mind. This was more than just a neighborhood dispute. Something was going on, something much more dangerous than we had originally anticipated. "Mr. Turner," the tallest of the men said, his voice cold and businesslike, "we need you to come with us. There are matters we need to discuss that go beyond your HOA leadership." Ralph didn't protest. In fact, he seemed to deflate, his posture slumping as he stepped toward the door with the men. It was then I noticed something odd. He wasn't looking at Emily or me with anger or defiance anymore. Instead, there was a flicker of fear in his eyes, something I hadn't seen from him before. As they left, Emily leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. "This is bigger than we thought. Ralph's involvement with the HOA was just a front. We're dealing with something much darker, Dan. I need to find out what it is before it's too late." I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. Whatever this was, we were in deeper than I ever imagined. The next few days were a blur of emotions. The adrenaline of the confrontation with Ralph and his sudden removal from the meeting left me both shaken and invigorated. But Emily wasn't celebrating. She wasn't satisfied with what had just happened. She was hunting for answers, digging deeper into the connections she had uncovered. I knew she was working behind the scenes, trying to understand who the men in suits were and how they were tied to Ralph's operations. But we couldn't afford to wait any longer. The stakes had risen, and we needed to make our move before the situation got worse. I got an unexpected call one evening, an unknown number. But when I answered, it was a voice I recognized. Maria Santos, the local detective who had been following the case from afar. "Dan, Emily's not going to like this," she said, her tone clipped. "I've been digging into some of the information you gave me, and we've just found something that ties Ralph to a much larger criminal operation. The people behind him are dangerous. They're using the HOA as a front to cover up illegal Dealings in real estate, and they have connections all over the state." Maria paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "You need to know this. Whoever these people are, they're not going to back down. You're in more danger now than you've ever been." I felt my stomach tighten. "So what do we do now?" "There's only one way to fight this," she said. "You need to go public, expose everything, bring the truth to light, and don't wait for them to strike first." With Maria's help, Emily and I made our move. We gathered everything we had, documents, emails, pictures, and with the help of the local news, we prepared to blow the lid off the entire operation. Emily had already made contacts with other homeowners in the area, and together we started spreading the word. We weren't just fighting for our property anymore. We were fighting for the entire community. But just as we were gearing up to expose the truth, we got a call that sent chills down my spine. The men in suits had returned. This time, they weren't just talking to Ralph. They were targeting our neighbors. And it wasn't just intimidation. It was something more sinister. They were trying to silence anyone who might stand against them. I turned to Emily, my heart racing. "This is it, Emily. We need to go public now." She nodded, determination hardening in her gaze. "We're not backing down. It's time to bring this all to the surface. No more hiding." Just then, the power went out. The whole block plunged into darkness. I heard the faint sound of footsteps, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot. Someone was outside, and I had a horrible feeling that we were about to face our greatest challenge yet. The moment the power went out, a heavy silence fell over the house. I froze, my pulse quickening. Emily stood at the window, her eyes scanning the darkened street outside. The stillness was broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze and the soft crunch of boots on the gravel sidewalk. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized we were no longer just fighting for a fence or for our home. We were fighting for our safety and for the future of our entire neighborhood. I grabbed my phone, but it was dead, the battery drained in the sudden blackout. "Emily," I whispered, my voice strained. "We need to get out of here." But Emily didn't flinch. She was already on the move, pulling out a flashlight from the drawer, her face lit only by the soft beam of light. "Stay calm, Dan. We've been through worse." Her voice was steady, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen more danger than anyone should. We both knew this was the moment. Either we exposed everything or we lost it all. We had prepared for this confrontation. We knew the risks, but now the stakes were higher than ever. As Emily moved toward the back door, I caught sight of a dark figure approaching the front of the house. A tall silhouette, too familiar. Ralph. It had to be him. I couldn't believe it. He was here, after everything we'd uncovered, after all the threats, after his disgrace at the meeting. Had he come to finish what he started? Emily was ahead of me now, heading for the back porch, her expression unflinching. "I've got this, Dan. Call the sheriff. Now." She didn't look back as she stepped into the darkness, leaving me with no choice but to follow her orders. I dialed 911, my hands shaking as the phone rang. "911, what's your emergency?" The operator asked. "We have men in the neighborhood and they're armed. I don't know who they are, but they're after us. We need immediate assistance." The line went silent for a moment, and I could feel my heart race. "We have officers en route, sir. Stay inside and lock the doors. Help is on the way." I hung up the phone and rushed to join Emily, my mind racing with 100 different thoughts. What had Ralph really been involved in all this time? What did he want now? I could feel my breath catch in my chest as I saw Emily standing at the edge of the backyard, her hand on the doorknob, waiting. The sound of footsteps outside grew louder, and then, suddenly, everything shifted. In one swift motion, the back door was kicked open, and 3 men in dark uniforms stormed in, their faces masked by the shadows of the night. Emily reacted immediately, moving with the precision and confidence of someone who had prepared for this moment her entire life. Her eyes locked on the first man, her movements fluid and calculated, as she stepped forward and tackled him to the ground before he even had a chance to react. The other two men hesitated, but they weren't prepared for what came next. A flash of blue lights filled the yard as the sheriff's department arrived. Deputies poured out of their vehicles, rushing forward to subdue the remaining attackers. Ralph's plans had unraveled, and his operatives had been caught red-handed. As the men were handcuffed and loaded into patrol cars, I turned to Emily, my breath coming in sharp gasps. "It's over, isn't it?" I asked. She nodded, but her face remained hard, resolute. "It's not over yet. There's still more to uncover. But this is a victory." The tension in the air slowly began to lift. But it wasn't just the threat that was gone. It was the realization that we had fought back, not just for ourselves, but for everyone in Brookridge Acres. The HOA that had once terrorized the neighborhood was finished, its corrupt leadership exposed, and its illegal activities brought to light. The community was finally free. But Emily wasn't done. As the officers continued to secure the area, she turned to me, her voice low but determined. "This was just the beginning, Dan. We can't let this happen again. We need to make sure the HOA never has this power again." As we stood together, watching the chaos unfold around us, I realized how much we had both changed. We weren't just homeowners anymore. We were fighters, and this was a battle we had won. If you've ever had a run-in with a corrupt HOA or faced a similar battle, we want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories of fighting back against injustice. You're not alone in this fight, and together we can take on anything that comes our way.